There's something hauntingly beautiful about the way ancient rituals whisper to us across the centuries, echoes of firelit ceremonies, whispered incantations, and sacred dances performed under moonlit skies. These weren't just routines, they were bridges between worlds, desperate attempts to touch the divine, to bargain with fate, or to summon forces beyond human understanding. Picture this, a shaman in flickering torchlight, their chants rising into the darkness, or a procession of masked figures moving through mist-shrouded forests, carrying secrets we've only begun to unravel. These are the moments where history bends toward mystery, where ordinary lives brushed against the extraordinary. Today, we're stepping into that shadowed realm to uncover 30 of the most captivating sacred rituals ever practiced, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of human belief. From the blood rites of forgotten empires to the tranquil meditations of secluded monks, these ceremonies didn't just shape cultures, they ignited revolutions of the spirit. Some were born from desperation, others from revelation, but all carried a power that still sends shivers down our spines. Think of the Aztecs offering their hearts to the sun, or the Norse seers who drank bitter brews to glimpse the future, practices so potent they could unite kingdoms or topple them. What if I told you these rituals weren't just relics of the past? Their echoes linger in our modern world, hidden in traditions we barely question, in holidays we celebrate without knowing why. That's the magic of this journey. We're not just uncovering dusty old customs. We're tracing the roots of wonder itself, the universal human longing to connect with something greater. So light a candle, lean in close, and let's wander together through the veiled corridors of time. The secrets of the ancients are waiting, and trust me, they're far stranger, far more breathtaking than you've ever dreamed. Deep in the heart of ancient Greece, hidden among the olive groves near Athens, a ceremony so secret unfolded that even now, after thousands of years, we're left piecing together fragments of the truth. The Eleusinian Mysteries, perhaps the most enigmatic religious rite of the classical world, drew kings and slaves alike to the sanctuary of Demeter, all seeking a glimpse beyond the veil of mortality. For over 1,000 years, not a single initiate ever broke their oath of silence. What could be so powerful, so terrifying, that death seemed a fair price for betrayal? It began with a myth as old as the seasons themselves, the story of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone, stolen away to the underworld. The rituals reenacted this cosmic drama, guiding initiates through a symbolic descent into darkness and rebirth. But the true heart of the mystery lay in the kykeon, a sacred drink scholars still debate today. Some say it was a simple barley brew, others argue it contained ergot, a fungus with mind-altering properties that could have sparked visions of the divine. Imagine drinking this potion in the torch-lit telesterion, surrounded by chanting priests, the air thick with incense. Did initiates truly glimpse the afterlife, or was it all an elaborate illusion? The secrecy was absolute. Men like Sophocles and Plato, who underwent the rites, wrote only in veiled hints about what they witnessed. Even the penalty for trespassing the sacred grounds was severe. A Roman statesman once executed 2 accused spies by pouring molten gold down their throats. Yet the mysteries endured because they promised something no other religion could hope beyond death, a secret so profound it changed those who learned it forever. What really happened in those shadowed halls, we may never know for certain, but the echoes of Eleusis still whisper to us. Some truths are too powerful for words. The jungles of the Maya world held a secret far darker than the Eleusinian Mysteries, where kings and queens willingly spilled their own blood, not in sacrifice to the gods, but as an offering so potent it could open the gates between worlds. This wasn't mere violence, it was sacred theater, a ritual so intricate that every drop carried the weight of prophecy. Picture a throne room thick with copal smoke, the ruler seated on jaguar pelts, drawing a stingray spine through their tongue or genitals, letting crimson ribbons soak into bark paper destined for the flames. The Maya believed blood wasn't just life, it was currency, a direct line to the ancestors who whispered back through the haze of pain and ecstasy. But why such extremes? For the Maya, blood was the ultimate bridge, a substance charged with Ciechulul, the sacred life force that animated both humans and gods. Royal bloodletting, often performed during celestial events like eclipses or the zenith passage of Venus, wasn't just symbolism, it was cosmic diplomacy. When Queen Lady Zok of Yaxchilan pulled a thorn-studded rope through her tongue in that famous lintel carving, she wasn't suffering. She was negotiating, her blood calling forth the vision serpent, a shimmering conduit to the spirit realm. Some scholars argue these rituals even triggered hallucinatory states, the combination of blood loss, chanting, and copal smoke creating visions where rulers spoke face-to-face with deities. The tools themselves were sacred works of art, stingray spines plucked from creatures that pierced flesh without leaving wounds, symbolized the duality of life and death. Obsidian blades, sharper than surgical steel, were engraved with glyphs naming them as vessels for divine contact. And those woven ropes, they weren't just cords, they mirrored the wits, the sacred mountain portals where gods descended. Every element was a calculated step in a dance older than the pyramids themselves. What's truly chilling is how these rituals blurred the line between horror and transcendence. Modern excavations have found chambers where royal blood mixed with cinnabar, creating pools of liquid mercury, a shimmering mirror meant to reflect the other world. We'll never fully grasp what it meant to stand in those torchlit rooms, watching your king bleed into a bowl while the constellations aligned overhead. But one thing's certain, for the Maya, pain wasn't an end. It was the price of power, the ink with which history's most vivid prophecies were written. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where eagles circled above crumbling cliffs, the most powerful woman in the ancient world sat trembling over a crack in the earth. The Pythia, Oracle of Delphi, didn't just predict the future, she was the future, her every slurred word dictating wars, colonies, and the fates of kings. But this was no charade. Before she could channel Apollo, priests led her through rituals so precise they bordered on alchemy. First, she bathed in the Castalian spring, washing away all impurity. Then, clad in white, she drank from the sacred Casotes fountain, its waters laced with minerals from the mountain's belly. Only then would she descend into the Aditon, the temple's innermost chamber, where a golden tripod awaited above a fissure leaking something far stranger than spring water, a vapor that reeked of sweet decay, curling up from the bedrock like the breath of the earth itself. Modern geologists have sniffed out the truth behind those fumes. Delphi sits atop intersecting faults where bituminous limestone meets groundwater, creating ethylene, a gas once used as surgical anesthesia. In low doses, it induces euphoria. In higher concentrations, violent trances. The Pythia didn't just inhale this, she marinated in it, her tripod positioned to concentrate the vapors as priests burned barley meal and laurel leaves to mask the stench. Witnesses described her transformation, skin flushing greenish pale, limbs twitching like a dreaming dog's before her voice dropped octaves into something utterly inhuman. Those who heard it swore it wasn't her speaking, but the god himself, syllables tumbling out in reverse, a jumble only the temple's male propheti could translate into dactylic hexameter. And what translations they were! When King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should attack Persia, the oracle replied, "If you cross the Halys River, a great empire will fall." He did his own. Before the Battle of Salamis, she told the Athenians to trust their wooden walls, not their acropolis, but their ships. Even Socrates' friend Chaerephon received a verdict that would echo through history. No man is wiser than Socrates. But her genius lay in ambiguity. City-states paid fortunes for her words, then bent them like swords to fit their ambitions. The real mystery isn't whether the fumes induced visions. It's how a peasant woman, chosen by lot and forbidden from political life, became the axis upon which all Greece turned. Perhaps the greatest prophecy was Delphi itself, proof that when humans crave certainty, even poison can taste like divinity. The freezing winds of Scandinavia carried more than just the scent of pine and salt. They bore the iron tang of blood spilled not in battle but in sacred communion. Twice a year, as the sun hung lowest in winter or burned brightest at midsummer, Viking chieftains gathered their people for the blót, a ritual so visceral it blurred the line between butchery and blessing. Picture this, a snow-dusted grove, its tallest oak hung with the carcasses of 9 rams, their throats slit so their blood rained down upon the wooden idols of Odin, Thor, and Freya below. This wasn't mere slaughter. Every splash against the gods' carved faces was a prayer, an exchange of life force for divine favor, a contract written in scarlet. But why animals and why 9? Norse cosmology revolved around the number 9 worlds in Yggdrasil. 9 days Odin hung sacrificed upon the world tree for wisdom. The blood or blót wasn't just an offering, it was liquid luck smeared on weapons before raids, dabbed on newborns' foreheads, even mixed into ale for warriors to drink. Archaeologists have found pits at Uppsala filled with bones of horses, boars, and hawks, all carefully butchered, their skulls split to release the spirit. Yet some sagas whisper of darker sacrifices. When famine stalked the land or rivers ran red with impending war, the blót might demand more. The Heimskringla recounts how King Orn of Sweden sacrificed his own sons, one every decade until only one remained, a grim bargain to prolong his rule. The rituals followed an eerie precision. First came the H-laut, a sacrificial bowl carved from the skull of a vanquished enemy, used to catch the blood. Then the Gothi, the priest, would chant spells as he flicked the blood with a bundle of fir twigs, anointing both idols and onlookers. Finally, the meat always boiled in vast cauldrons because roasting was deemed too mundane for the gods. Every bite was sacred, every drop of broth a shared pact with the divine. Even the leftovers held power. Bones were buried in fields to ensure fertile soil, while hides became talismans nailed to temple walls. What's often missed is how these brutal rites bound communities together. After the feasting came games, marriages, and legal proceedings, all sanctified by the shared act of sacrifice. A warrior might hesitate to betray the man who'd stood beside him, arms sticky with the same holy blood. Perhaps that's the true lesson of the blót. In a world where frost giants loomed and Ragnarok crept closer each day, survival demanded more than strength. It required blood given freely, spilled reverently, to remind both gods and mortals who they fought for. The air over Tenochtitlan grew thick with tension as the final days of the 52-year cycle drew to a close, a moment when every fire in the Aztec Empire was extinguished, every hearth gone cold. This wasn't mere tradition, it was a race against time. According to the Aztec calendar, the world had already been destroyed 4 times, and if the gods weren't satisfied with the new fire ceremony, a 5th cataclysm would swallow the earth in eternal darkness. Imagine the silence that fell across the city as night deepened. Families huddled inside their homes, clay dishes shattered in the streets as symbols of the fragile world waiting to be reborn or shattered forever. At the heart of this ritual lay a sacrifice so precise it bordered on macabre artistry. On the Hill of the Star, just beyond the city, priests clad in the regalia of star demons watched the Pleiades constellation. If those celestial fires continued to burn as they crossed the zenith, the ceremony could proceed. A captured warrior, chosen for his purity and vitality, was laid upon a stone slab. As the priest struck flint against his breastbone, they weren't just taking a life. They were stealing fire from the human body itself, kindling the new sun in his opened chest. The crowd's roar when those first flames leapt up must have been deafening, a collective gasp of relief echoing across the valley. Torches were lit from that central fire, carried by runners to every temple, every home, reigniting civilization itself. But the symbolism ran deeper than spectacle. The victim's heart wasn't just a vessel, it mirrored Natia, the sun god, who required daily nourishment of blood to rise each morning. The 52-year cycle mirrored the Mesoamerican calendar round, the exact point where the solar and sacred calendars aligned, a rare moment when time itself could be reset. Even the tools held meaning. The fire drill used to spark the flames replicated the mythic weapon Nanahuatzin, the humble god who threw himself into the primal bonfire to become the sun. What's often overlooked is how this ritual bound the empire together. For weeks beforehand, people fasted, swept their homes, and cast statues of their household gods into lakes, symbolic deaths to prepare for renewal. The moment those new fires blazed, it wasn't just the sun that was reborn. It was the social order, the crops in the field, the very breath in their lungs. Modern excavations have found caches of ritual objects buried beneath temples, all dating to 52-year intervals, proof of the ceremony's unbroken power. In a world where the sun's survival was never guaranteed, the Aztecs didn't just pray for light. They ripped it from the brink of oblivion again and again, with hands steadied by desperation and hope. The high plateaus of Tibet hold a funeral rite so stark, so radically selfless, it turns our deepest instincts about death upside down. Imagine a body carried before dawn to a remote dirtro, a sky burial site, where a rogiapa or body breaker works with methodical precision under the watchful eyes of waiting vultures. There's no coffin, no grave, not even ashes to scatter. Instead, the flesh is carefully stripped from bone, the bones crushed with mallets and mixed with barley flour, every fragment offered to the soaring Shakti birds. To outsiders, it might seem brutal, but in Vajrayana Buddhism, this is the ultimate act of generosity, a final gift to nourish living beings, a surrender so complete it severs the soul's last attachment to the physical world. Why such an extreme practice? Tibet's rugged terrain offers little soil for burial, and with timber scarce, cremation was historically reserved for high lamas. But sky burial isn't just pragmatism, it's philosophy in action. The body, emptied of consciousness, becomes a mere shell, and returning it to the ecosystem embodies the Buddha's teachings on impermanence. The vultures aren't scavengers here, they're dakinis, celestial beings who carry the soul toward rebirth. There's even a sacred calculus to the ritual. If the birds consume every morsel, it signals the deceased lived virtuously. Leftovers demand extra prayers to purify lingering karma. The rogiapa performs their duty with astonishing ritual precision. First, they tie the body into a fetal position mirroring rebirth. Incense of juniper and sandalwood purifies the air as they chant Aum Aham, a mantra dissolving the body's elements into sky, breath, and mind. The cutting itself follows an exact sequence, muscles parted along anatomical lines, organs placed on flat stones like offerings at an altar. Even the tools are symbolic. The curved knife mirrors the flaying blade of the wrathful deity Yamantaka, who destroys illusion. Modern science has uncovered eerie layers to this practice. Vultures' highly acidic stomachs destroy pathogens, making sky burial remarkably hygienic. And those towering dirtros aren't randomly chosen, they're often near ancient trade routes, ensuring the birds know to gather. Some Western travelers have misinterpreted the rite as hastening death, but families wait 3 days before the ceremony, ensuring consciousness has fully departed. The real shock isn't the physical act, it's the psychological revolution it demands. In a world obsessed with preserving corpses through embalming or cryonics, Tibetans embrace decay as sacred alchemy, a last act of ecological grace. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in what isn't there. No monuments, no epitaphs, not even a name etched in stone. The wind scours the dirtro clean by noon, leaving only stories, and the silent certainty that every body in the end belongs to the sky. The summer heat in Strasbourg had reached unbearable levels by July 1518, but it wasn't just the sun making people sweat, it was the dancing. It began quietly, almost innocently, with a single woman named Frau Trophia twisting in the street, her feet pounding the cobblestones without rhythm, her body rigid with exhaustion. Within days, dozens joined her, their limbs jerking uncontrollably, their faces slack with terror. By month's end, over 400 souls were caught in the frenzy, dancing until their shoes split, their souls bled, their ribs cracked from exertion. This wasn't celebration, it was possession. What could drive an entire city to dance itself to death? Some historians point to the dancing mania epidemics that swept medieval Europe, collective stress responses to years of famine, plague, and feudal oppression. Strasbourg had endured all three, plus the recent collapse of the harvest, but others argue for something more sinister: ergot poisoning. The same fungus linked to the Eleusinian Mysteries thrives in damp rye, and its toxins can trigger hallucinations and muscle spasms. Imagine eating bread laced with this poison, your nerves alight with false fire, your brain convinced some unseen force puppeteers your limbs. The city's desperate response reveals how deeply they feared the supernatural. Priests declared the dancers cursed by Saint Vitus, a martyr known for both healing and inflicting uncontrollable movement. The council banned music and gambling, believing such pleasures had angered God. They even constructed a wooden stage, hiring musicians to play faster, a shocking attempt to dance out the affliction. When that failed, the afflicted were marched to the nearby Savon Cave shrine, their feet dipped in holy water, their bodies anointed with oils meant to exorcise the demonic rhythm. The strangest detail: some survivors claimed they wanted to dance, describing an ecstatic pull stronger than pain or reason. Modern neurologists see parallels in rare movement disorders like Sydenham's chorea, where strep infections trigger involuntary motions. But the cultural context is key. This was an era when dance could be both sacred and profane, a gateway to divine ecstasy or devilish torment. Perhaps the real curse wasn't the dancing itself, but the terror of losing control in a world where every misstep risked damnation. No cure was ever found. The plague burned itself out by September, leaving behind broken bodies and a chilling question: was this mass hysteria a toxic accident or something far older, a remnant of pagan trance rituals warped by Christian fears? The cobblestones of Strasbourg hold no answers, only the ghostly echo of feet that couldn't stop. On the volcanic shores of ancient Hawaii, the air itself seemed to tremble with invisible boundaries, lines so sacred that stepping across them could mean death. This was the kapu system, a web of divine laws so intricate it dictated when commoners could walk in daylight, what foods women were permitted to eat, even the direction a fisherman's paddle could stir the water. More than mere rules, these were cosmic contracts designed to maintain Pono, the perfect balance between gods, nature, and humanity. Violations weren't just crimes, they were ruptures in the fabric of reality, threatening to unleash chaos upon the islands. Take something as simple as a shadow. If a commoner's shadow fell across the path of an alley, a high chief believed to be descended from the gods, the punishment was swift and severe. Why? Because in Hawaiian cosmology, a shadow carried mana, the spiritual essence of a person. To trespass with one's shadow was to steal the chief's sacred power. The condemned might be strangled, crushed under a rock, or burned alive. Execution methods meant to purify the offense with fire or the weight of the earth itself. Even accidental breaches demanded ritual cleansing. Fishermen who glimpsed a consecrated temple while at sea would plunge into the ocean, scrubbing their eyes with salt water to avert divine wrath. Women faced particularly labyrinthine restrictions. Eating bananas, coconuts, or pork foods linked to male gods was forbidden. During menstruation, they were barred from communal spaces entirely, forced to retreat to isolated hail-pair huts until ritually cleansed by priests. These taboos weren't about oppression but preservation. The Hawaiian pantheon was a volatile family of deities, and women's kapu protected their potent life-giving mana from clashing with male energies. When a chief's wife gave birth, the entire village fell silent for days, lest ordinary speech disrupt the newborn's connection to the divine. The system's brilliance lay in its flexibility. Kapu shifted with the seasons, the tides, even the phases of the moon. Certain fish were forbidden during spawning periods to ensure future abundance. Crops couldn't be harvested until priests performed the wa ceremony, spitting chewed kava root onto the fields to awaken them. Every restriction served a purpose, binding human actions to the rhythm of the natural world. But what happened when someone broke kapu not by accident but in open defiance? The infamous story of Kamehameha has rise to power reveals the system's terrifying duality. In 1782, the young warrior deliberately ate a loa nut in public, a fruit reserved for gods and chiefs. This calculated blasphemy was a test. If the gods spared him, it would prove his destiny to unite the islands. They did, and the kapu system's own rigidity became the tool of its eventual collapse. By 1819, Kamehameha's heir Liholiho would shock the kingdom by sitting beside women at a feast, eating forbidden foods together in full view of the people. The message was clear: even gods could rewrite their own laws, yet traces of kapu linger. Modern Hawaiians still avoid stepping over fallen fruit, believing it disrespects the tree's mana. Fishermen whisper prayers before casting nets, honoring ancestral traditions. The system's true legacy isn't in its brutality, but in its reminder: every action, however small, ripples through the visible and invisible worlds. To ancient Hawaiians, that wasn't superstition, it was survival. Deep in the primordial forests of Gaul and Britain, where moonlight barely pierced the canopy of ancient oaks, the Druids performed a ritual so precise it blurred the line between botany and magic. On the sixth night of the lunar cycle, always when the moon hung fat and low, a white-robed priest would ascend the gnarled trunk of an oak, his golden sickle gleaming against the darkness. Below him, fellow initiates held open a pure white cloak, ready to catch the falling treasure before it could be defiled by touching the earth. Mistletoe, the Celts' most sacred plant, believed to pulse with the lifeblood of the gods themselves. This wasn't just herb gathering, every motion was a sacred act. The golden sickle ensured no base metal tainted the ritual. The white cloak symbolized the other world's purity. Even the timing was critical. Mistletoe cut under a waning moon was thought to lose its potency. The Druids called it all-heal, a paradoxical plant that thrived without roots yet could cure infertility, neutralize poisons, and even open doors to the spirit realm. Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, who witnessed these rites, wrote that the Druids believed mistletoe made barren animals fertile and was an antidote to all evil, a claim so extraordinary it fueled centuries of European folklore. But why mistletoe and why oaks? The answer lies in Celtic cosmology. Oaks were revered as kings of the forest, their endurance symbolizing wisdom and strength. Mistletoe, growing high in their branches without touching soil, was seen as a divine gift, a plant neither of earth nor sky, but a bridge between worlds. Its evergreen leaves in winter, when the oak stood bare, suggested immortality. The pearlescent berries were thought to contain the oak's life force, harvested at peak power during the winter solstice. Modern science adds eerie resonance. Mistletoe contains phytohormones that stimulate growth, and some compounds do show anti-tumor properties in early research. Did the Druids intuit its biological oddities, or was their reverence purely mystical? The rituals extended far beyond harvesting. Mistletoe was brewed into potions, its berries crushed into fertility tonics. Warriors wore sprigs into battle as talismans, believing them to deflect arrows and curses alike. Most hauntingly, some accounts describe human sacrifices beneath mistletoe-laden oaks, victims strangled or stabbed, their blood nourishing the roots in a grotesque symmetry of life and death. Archaeologists have found evidence of bog bodies in Celtic regions with mistletoe pollen in their stomachs, suggesting ritual consumption before their deaths. What survives today is a shadow of these rites, the kiss under the mistletoe, a sanitized remnant of Druidic fertility magic, the plant's association with Christmas. A shrewd repurposing by early Christians who couldn't eradicate its pagan allure. But walk through a winter forest where mistletoe clings to bare oaks and you might still feel it, that shiver of recognition, the whisper of a time when plants weren't just flora but keys to realms beyond our own. The Druids knew something we've forgotten. That magic doesn't vanish. It just changes form, waiting for those who still know how to look. Every spring, when cherry blossoms dust the streets of Kawasaki, Japan, something extraordinary unfolds. A festival so audacious it would make even the most liberal cultures blush. The Kanemaru Matsuri, or Festival of the Steel Phallus, transforms the quiet grounds of the Kaneyama Shrine into a riot of pink, glitter, and towering phallic sculptures. But this isn't mere shock value. Behind the laughter and risque souvenir lollipops lies a 1,000-year-old legend of divine intervention, broken curses, and a blade sharper than shame. The myth begins with a demon, a particularly vindictive one who hid inside a young woman's body, biting off the genitals of two would-be suitors with razor-sharp teeth. Desperate, she sought help from a blacksmith who forged an iron phallus strong enough to break the demon's teeth. When the third suitor approached with this metallic marvel, the demon shattered its fangs and fled, freeing the woman to marry. The shrine became a sanctuary for those seeking protection from sexually transmitted infections, infertility, and marital discord. Today, the festival's centerpiece is a palanquin carrying a 7-foot-tall, candy-pink phallus through cheering crowds, its polished surface gleaming under the spring sun like a beacon of unapologetic vitality. What's most fascinating isn't the spectacle itself, but who participates. Grandmothers in traditional kimonos giggle while posing for photos beside rubbery vulva-shaped lanterns. Salarymen in business suits solemnly buy charms shaped like genitalia, believed to ward off workplace misfortunes. LGBTQ+ groups march proudly, reclaiming the shrine's ancient inclusivity, a rarity in a nation where such topics remain largely taboo. Even the mikoshi bearers who heft the giant phallus on their shoulders include women and children, a radical departure from male-only roles in most Shinto rites. The festival's modern twists are just as compelling. Priests bless vibrators and dildos brought by worshippers. A Sake brewery sells penis wine from bottles shaped like, you guessed it, with proceeds funding HIV research. And those ubiquitous candy lollipops, originally created to normalize conversations about sexual health, they've become global symbols of body positivity. But peel back the glitter and you'll find profound cultural layers. The phallus, or oshiri, has been a Shinto fertility symbol since ancient times, carved into boundary markers to ward off evil. Kanemaru Matsuri's genius is its refusal to divorce the sacred from the sensual. In a society where sex is often whispered about behind closed doors, this one day flings the doors wide open, reminding everyone that desire in all its forms is nothing to hide. Perhaps the most touching moment comes when the crowd parts for couples struggling with infertility. They touch the palanquin, whisper prayers, and leave ima plaques painted with baby-shaped outlines. The shrine's priest, clad in white robes, doesn't blush. He nods knowingly. After all, this festival was never just about sex, it's about the messy, joyful, terrifying act of being human. And sometimes it takes a 6-foot glittering penis to remind us of that. The streets of ancient Mesopotamia buzzed with an energy unlike any other festival day. Drums throbbed, incense coiled skyward, and crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder along the processional way. At the heart of the frenzy stood the king, clad in robes stitched with constellations, about to perform his most sacred duty, not as ruler but as groom. For one night each year during the Akitu festival, he would shed his mortal title and become Dumuzi, the shepherd god, wed to a high priestess embodying Inanna, goddess of love and war. This wasn't mere pageantry. The fate of the entire kingdom, its crops, its armies, even its claim to divine favor, rested on the consummation of this ritual. Archaeologists studying cuneiform tablets have pieced together the ceremony's startling intimacy. The priestess, often the Ntu of or Ishtar's Nadatu in Babylon, would begin by singing the Urshama, hymns calling Inanna down from the heavens. As the sun set, she and the king ascended the Jiparu, the temple's innermost chamber, its walls painted with scenes of entwined deities. There, they reenacted the mythic union of Dumuzi and Inanna, a cosmic blueprint for fertility. The king recited verses praising his honey-sweet bride while she declared his body a field ready for planting. Their physical union was believed to channel divine energy into the earth, coaxing rivers to rise and grain to swell. But this ritual was more than agricultural magic. It was raw political theater. By publicly embodying Dumuzi, the king proved his divine right to rule. Tablets from Lagash describe how failed harvests following the ceremony could trigger rebellions, as if the gods themselves had revoked their blessing. The priestess held equal power. Her approval legitimized the king's reign. One broken tablet even hints at a shocking reversal, a case where the Ntu refused the union, effectively declaring the king unfit. The aftermath was just as ritualized. At dawn, the couple emerged to scatter barley seeds soaked in sacred beer, while priests chanted accounts of Inanna's descent to the underworld, a metaphor for seasonal cycles of death and rebirth. Farmers saved seeds from this ceremony all year, believing them imbued with Dumuzi's vitality. Even the royal bedchamber became a relic. Its linens were cut into strips and distributed as talismans against infertility. Modern scholars still debate what really occurred in the Jiparu. Some argue the union was symbolic, others point to explicit lyrics in the love songs of Dumuzi and Inanna. But perhaps the truth lies in the ruins of where excavators found thousands of tiny clay phalluses buried in temple courtyards, offerings from ordinary citizens hoping to borrow a spark of that sacred fertility. For Mesopotamians, the divine wasn't distant. It lived in the sweat of lovers, the rustle of ripening grain, the unbroken chain between bedchamber and harvest. To witness the sacred marriage was to see the universe itself renew its vows. In the quiet heart of Konya, Turkey, as dusk paints the sky in violet hues, a single flute's mournful cry cuts through the silence, a signal that the sacred is about to unfold. The whirling dervishes of the Mevlevi order step forward, their white robes billowing like ghosts against the dim light, their tall felt hats symbolizing the tombstones of ego they're about to transcend. This is the Sema ceremony, a dance so precise it becomes prayer, a spinning so relentless it shatters the boundaries between earth and heaven. But don't mistake this for performance. Every rotation, every outstretched palm is a map to a realm beyond human senses where the soul touches the divine. The ritual begins with deliberate stillness. The sheikh, or spiritual guide, intones verses from the Quran as the dervishes remove their black cloaks, symbolic of the grave they leave behind. Then, arms crossed over their chests, they step into the circle, right foot leading, always counterclockwise. The first turn is slow, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters of an invisible current. But as the ney flute's lament grows louder, the tempo quickens. The right hand lifts toward the sky, ready to receive grace. The left turns palm down, channeling that blessing back to the earth. The skirt of the robe, called a tenure, flares outward, creating a perfect cone, a living axis between worlds. Science offers fascinating clues about why this spinning unlocks ecstasy. The inner ear's vestibular system, responsible for balance, can induce altered states when overwhelmed by motion. The repetitive clockwise whirl, averaging 33 rotations per minute, floods the brain with rhythmic input, mimicking the effects of deep meditation. Dervishes describe entering hal, a trance where time dissolves and the self evaporates, leaving only union with the beloved, the Sufi term for God. Modern neurologists compare it to the runner's high, where endorphins and dopamine create euphoria, but here it's directed toward transcendence. Yet the Sema is far more than physiology. Each element is a verse in Rumi's poetic cosmology. The dervishes' hats are called sik, shaped like urns to collect divine light. Their felt material represents humility, woven from the wool of sacrificed sheep. Even the number of rotations holds meaning. Some say it mirrors the 33 vertebrae of the human spine, others the age of Christ at crucifixion, a nod to Sufism's interfaith mysticism. The ceremonies' 4 sections mirror creation's journey, from divine unity to separation, longing, and finally reunion. What's often overlooked is how radical this ritual was in its time. Founded by Rumi in the 13th century, the Mevlevi order defied Orthodox Islam's suspicion of music and dance. Rumi's famous declaration, "There are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground," challenged rigid dogma, insisting the heart's orientation mattered more than ritual form. Even today, the dervish's spinning is a quiet revolution, a reminder that divinity isn't confined to mosques or scriptures. It's in motion, in breath, in the wild surrender of letting go. Visitors to Konya often weep during the Sema, though they can't explain why. Perhaps it's the shock of witnessing something so vulnerable yet so disciplined, human beings becoming winds, dissolving into love's hurricane. Or maybe it's the dervishes' faces, serenely blank yet radiant, as if they've glimpsed a secret just beyond our reach. One thing's certain, this isn't entertainment. It's an invitation. Every whirl whispers the same truth Rumi taught 7 centuries ago, that longing is the thread, and we are all just spools unraveling toward home. Beneath the Caribbean sun, where sugar cane fields sway like restless spirits, Haitian folklore whispers of a fate worse than death, the zombie. Not the flesh-hungry monsters of Hollywood, but something far more chilling. Empty-eyed souls trapped between worlds, robbed of will, bound to toil in eternal silence. These were the zombie of Vodou, victims not of magic, but of a terrifying science masquerading as the supernatural. The process began with a carefully staged death. Secret societies called Bizango or Sanpool would administer a poison brewed from pufferfish, its lethal tetrodotoxin slowing the victim's pulse to near undetectable levels. Families mourned, graves were dug, and doctors, baffled by the symptoms, signed death certificates. Days later, the corpse would be exhumed, disoriented and paralyzed, then fed a paste containing datura, a deliriant that scrambled memory and identity. The result, a broken husk, obedient to the Baka, the Vodou priest who wielded this knowledge as both punishment and control. Wade Davis, the ethnobotanist who infiltrated these societies in the 1980s, found recipes so precise they defied coincidence. The poison's dosage had to be exact, too little, and the victim revived too soon, too much, and they'd suffocate in their coffin. Timing was equally critical. Dig up the body after 3 days, and the brain damage from oxygen deprivation ensured compliance. Survivors described nightmares of being conscious but unable to move, hearing their own funerals before waking to a shovel's blow. But the darkest twist lay in the reversal rituals. A Baka seeking to free a zombie would administer salt, a substance believed to wake the soul in Vodou cosmology. In reality, sodium ions counteracted the tetrodotoxin, restoring partial lucidity. Some victims, like the infamous Clavius Narcissus, stumbled back into their villages years later, bearing scars from their graves and fragmented memories of forced labor on remote plantations. His case, verified by physicians and anthropologists, proved zombification wasn't myth. It was a calculated weapon of social terror. Modern Haiti still fears the zombie curse, though its methods have faded. Tetrodotoxin remains one of nature's most potent neurotoxins, a single pufferfish carrying enough to kill 30 adults. Yet what lingers isn't just the science, it's the cultural wound. These weren't mindless monsters, but people betrayed by their communities, sacrificed to send a message. The real horror wasn't the walking dead, it was the living who made them that way. High in the thin air of the Andes, where glaciers cling to volcanic peaks, the Inca performed a ritual that still haunts archaeologists today, not for its brutality but for its heartbreaking tenderness. The Capacocha ceremonies didn't just demand lives, they demanded perfection. Children, often as young as 6, were selected with ruthless precision, unblemished skin, symmetrical features, and lineage tracing back to noble bloodlines. These weren't random victims, they were living offerings, chosen to carry the empire's prayers directly to the gods. The journey to their final resting places was as ritualized as their selection. For months before the sacrifice, the children were fed like royalty maize, chicha beer, even coca leaves their bodies fattened as sacred vessels. Then came the procession, a caravan winding up treacherous slopes to summits like Lulaloco, where the air is so thin it burns the lungs. Along the way, priests administered ayahuasca and chicha laced with sedatives, ensuring the children drifted into a numbed euphoria. Imagine these small figures wrapped in fine textiles, their cheeks flushed from altitude and herbs, walking willingly toward the ice not as victims but as honored messengers. The moment of sacrifice was startlingly gentle. Unlike the Aztecs' heart extractions, the Capacocha left no visible wounds. Children were given one last draught of chicha, then tucked into fetal positions inside stone tombs, their bodies so perfectly preserved by the cold that 5 centuries later, their eyelashes remain intact. The boy, now known as El Niño, was found with coca still packed between his teeth, his face frozen in what looks like peaceful sleep. Nearby, the lightning girl wears a feathered headdress, her dress stained with ritual corn beer. These weren't acts of cruelty, they were acts of love, a belief that the purest souls could commune with Apus, the mountain gods, bringing rain, fertility, and protection. Modern science has peeled back layers of this mystery. Hair analysis reveals these children's diets shifted dramatically months before death, switching from peasant potatoes to elite delicacies like llama meat. Their fingernails show signs of ayahuasca's hallucinogenic harmaline, suggesting they were in trances during their final hours, most poignant of all. Their bodies show no struggle. Whether from drugs, devotion, or both, they seem to have accepted their fate as an honor, a chance to become Malquis, eternal intermediaries between worlds. What lingers isn't just the tragedy, but the paradox. These sacrifices were acts of profound reverence, yet they required a chilling calculus that a child's life was fair trade for the empire's survival. Today, their mummies stare back at us from museum cases, their lips parted as if halfway through a song, reminding us that even the most beautiful beliefs can cast the darkest shadows. On the eve of May 1st, when the last violet hues of twilight faded over the hills of ancient Ireland and Scotland, entire villages gathered in breathless anticipation, not to flee from fire but to worship it. The Beltane fires roared skyward, their crackling tongues painting the night in gold and shadow, transforming ordinary hilltops into thresholds of the other world. This wasn't just a celebration of summer's arrival, it was a daring pact with forces older than memory, a night when the veil between realms grew thin enough to touch. Cattle, the lifeblood of Celtic communities, were the first to undergo the ritual. Farmers drove their herds between twin bonfires, close enough for the heat to singe their hides, while druids chanted blessings over the crackling flames. The logic was visceral, fire purified, smoke warded off malevolent spirits that might sour milk or blight livestock. Even the ash-held power farmers would later rub it onto their animals' backs, a tangible shield against the unseen. But there was another layer to this ritual, one modern scientists find eerily plausible. The intense heat likely killed parasites and bacteria clinging to the animals' hides, offering real protection against disease. The Celts didn't just believe in magic, they wielded it through instinct and observation. Then came the lovers, young couples, hands clasped, sprinted toward the dying embers, leaping just as the flames collapsed into glowing coals. A clean jump meant fertility, prosperity, a year blessed by the goddess Brigid. A stumble, ominous whispers would follow the pair all season. Some accounts describe mothers carrying infants through the smoke, while newlyweds exchanged vows over the flames, their promises mingling with the sparks rising toward the stars. The fires weren't just symbolic, they were alchemical, transforming hopes into something as tangible as the warmth on their skin. But Beltane's true genius lay in its duality. By sunrise, every hearth in the village lay cold, their fires deliberately extinguished the night before. The only flames permitted were those kindled fresh from the sacred bonfires, carried home on torches of hawthorn or oak. This wasn't mere tradition, it was a communal reset, a literal and spiritual renewal. Even the Druids need fire, struck from ritual friction between sacred woods, echoed this theme, fire born from human effort yet touched by the divine. Modern remnants of Beltane still flicker across the British Isles. In Edinburgh, thousands gather atop Colton Hill to watch costumed performers reenact the old rites. In County Limerick, farmers quietly tie May Eve ribbons to their gates, a faded echo of the flower-crowned May bushes once erected at crossroads, but perhaps the most haunting continuity lies in the bonfires themselves. On isolated islands like Lewis, peat stacks still blaze against the spring darkness, their light a stubborn refusal to let the old ways fade entirely. The Celts understood something we've mostly forgotten. That fire isn't just a tool, it's a conversation, one that began millennia ago, and still crackles in the collective memory of every spark lit on a May Eve night. The streets of Babylon erupted in chaos each spring, but not the kind you'd expect. For 12 dizzying days, the world's most powerful empire willingly turned itself upside down during the Akitu festival, a New Year celebration so audacious it blurred the lines between carnival and cosmic reboot. At the heart of it all stood Marduk's temple, where priests prepared to reenact the universe's creation, and the king braced for a humiliation that could cost him his throne. Day one began with a ritual shock to the system. The high priest would wrench the golden statue of Marduk from its pedestal, stripping the city of its patron god's physical presence. Imagine the terror this sparked Babylon without its divine protector, vulnerable to demons and disasters. For days, the people fasted and wailed, reenacting the primordial chaos before creation. Then, on the fourth day, the priest would open the Enuma Elish, the epic poem etched on 7 clay tablets, and recite the story of Marduk's battle against Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. This wasn't just storytelling, it was incantation. Every word was believed to recharge the world's metaphysical batteries, replaying the moment order triumphed over entropy. But the true spectacle came on the 5th day. The king, dressed in threadbare rags instead of his jeweled robes, would be dragged before Marduk's altar. There, the high priest delivered a ritual slap so hard it echoed through the temple, a visceral reminder that even emperors answered to the gods. Next came the ultimate test. The monarch had to kneel and swear he hadn't neglected Babylon or oppressed its people. If the priests doubted his sincerity, the slap would repeat until tears streamed down his face. Only then would the priest return the royal scepter, symbolically renewing Marduk's mandate to rule. The festival's climax was a theatrical masterpiece. A wooden boat adorned with snake heads, a replica of Marduk's vessel in the Enuma Elish, was hauled through the Ishtar Gate, followed by actors playing captive gods and chaos monsters. The procession ended at the Akitu House, a temple outside the city walls where Marduk's statue was held captive for 3 nights. This mirrored the god's mythical descent into the underworld, a period of vulnerability before resurrection. When the statue finally returned to Babylon on the 11th day, the city exploded in relief. Wine flowed, prisoners were pardoned, and the king hosted a feast where he, now restored to glory, ate the same meal as Marduk's statue, a communion of mortal and divine. Archaeologists have unearthed receipts for the festival's expenses, thousands of liters of beer, truckloads of dates, and even payments for chaos monster costumes. But the real genius of Akitu wasn't its pageantry, it was its psychological precision. By forcing the king to endure humiliation, it prevented tyranny. By reenacting chaos, it made order feel miraculous, and by letting citizens mock authority during the festival's carnival days, it vented social tensions safely. In a world where rulers claimed divinity, a kitu was the ultimate reality check, a reminder that even empires needed yearly rebirth. The chisel strikes bone before it ever touches skin, a sharp, rhythmic tap-tap-tap that echoes through the sacred meeting house. This is moko, the Maori art of facial tattooing, where every curve and spiral isn't just ink under flesh, but a genealogy etched in pain and pride. Unlike other tattoo traditions, moko wasn't merely decorative. It was a living document, a map of ancestry carved with U-high chisels dipped in pigment mixed with the wearer's own blood. Imagine the scene: a tohunga moko, the master carver, chanting invocations to the gods as he works, his tools slicing through nerve-rich facial tissue with surgical precision. The blood that dripped wasn't wasted, it was absorbed into sacred bark cloth, later burned in ritual fires to seal the spiritual bond between the wearer and their ancestors. Each design was as unique as a fingerprint, encoding everything from tribal affiliations to personal exploits. The koru, or spiral, might represent new beginnings unfolding like a fern frond. The manaya, a bird-like figure, acted as a guardian against evil spirits. Even the placement held meaning. Men's moko typically covered the entire face, while women wore intricate patterns on the chin and lips, a visual language that announced their status before they spoke a word. But this was no vanity project. The process was excruciating, often spanning months of healing between sessions. Swelling and infection were common, and some aspirants died from the ordeal. To endure was to prove one's worthiness, to literally wear one's pain as a badge of honor. The pigments themselves were sacred alchemy. Burnt kori gum mixed with caterpillar fungus created the signature blue-black hue, while lighter shades came from clay or ash. Each ingredient was gathered under strict karakia, or incantations, transforming raw materials into vessels of spiritual power. Modern science has uncovered eerie layers to this tradition. The chiseling method, which leaves grooves rather than smooth ink deposits, actually stimulates collagen production, making the designs more resilient to aging than needle tattoos. Yet moko's true power lay in its taboos. To touch another's moko without permission was to disrespect their entire lineage. Captured enemies might be decapitated, their preserved heads still bearing their moko sold to European collectors as macabre curiosities. This desecration nearly erased the practice, as many Maori hid their faces to avoid such fates. But like the patterns themselves, the tradition couldn't be erased entirely. Today, a renaissance sees Maori reclaiming moko not as decoration, but as a defiant act of cultural resurrection. Each strike of the chisel a declaration that some stories are too vital to fade. What's often overlooked is how these designs functioned as legal signatures. When Maori chiefs signed the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, some pressed their inked faces onto the document, believing their moko bound them as solemnly as any written word. In a world obsessed with digital identities, moko whispers an older truth. That identity isn't just who you are, but what you're willing to endure to remember it. The scars remain, not as wounds, but as proof that the past never really leaves us. It simply waits to be carved into the present. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, where the air hums with the whispers of ancient kings and priests, a secret lies hidden behind the unassuming walls of the chapel of the tablet in Axum. Here, beneath the shadow of towering stelae that pierce the sky like stone fingers, rests what millions believe to be the original Ark of the Covenant, the same sacred chest said to have once held the 10 Commandments, guarded now by a single monk who will never leave its side alive. The legends claim it arrived 3,000 years ago, carried by Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, smuggled out of Jerusalem before Babylon's destruction. But it's not the artifact's disputed origins that send chills down the spine. It's the rituals that still animate this holy city every January when replicas of the Ark, called tablets, emerge from their sanctuaries in a spectacle of faith so potent it transforms the streets into a river of white robes and unwavering devotion. The ceremonies begin in utter secrecy. Under cover of darkness, priests remove the tablets' wooden slabs inscribed with the Ark's sacred contents from their inner sanctuaries. Wrapped in layers of embroidered cloth, these replicas are believed to absorb the Ark's divine essence, making them as holy as the original. As dawn breaks, a procession of tens of thousands forms, the air thick with incense and the drone of prayer sticks beating against leather shields. Women ululate, men chant psalms in jays, the ancient liturgical language, and children scatter flowers before the path of the priests, who move with slow, deliberate steps, the tablets balanced precariously on their heads. One misstep, one moment of faltering focus, and the crowd believes disaster could strike, a belief so deeply held that in 1935, when Italian forces invaded Ethiopia, priests hid the tablets in caves rather than risk their desecration. At the heart of this fervor stands the Nebure Ed, the guardian monk of the true Ark. Chosen from youth for a life of celibacy and silence, he will never set foot outside the chapel compound until his death, when another takes his place. His sole duty, to pray before the Ark, maintaining a covenant older than Christianity itself. No one, not even Ethiopia's patriarch, may enter the inner sanctum. The few who have glimpsed the chapel's interior, like the British historian Tudor Parfitt, describe an eerie stillness, an almost physical weight to the air, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. Modern skeptics question how the original Ark could have crossed continents, pointing to the lack of archaeological evidence. Yet for the faithful, the power lies not in provenance but in practice. Every January 19th, when the tablets return to their churches after the Timkat festival, the streets erupt in a jubilation so raw it feels primal. Men dive into sacred pools, reenacting Christ's baptism, while others prostrate themselves as the tablets pass, pressing their foreheads to the earth in a gesture of surrender to something far greater than history. The rituals aren't just tradition, they're a living thread connecting the present to a time when the divine walked among humanity, leaving behind a covenant wrapped in gold and mystery. What lingers long after the procession's end is the paradox of accessibility and exclusion. Millions revere the Ark, yet only one living soul may stand in its presence. The tablets are paraded before crowds, yet their contents remain as unknowable as the originals. In a world hungry for proof, Axum offers something far more compelling, faith so palpable it needs no validation. Whether the Ark rests behind those chapel walls or not, the rituals it inspires remind us that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only honored generation after generation, in the hush of whispered prayers and the thunder of 1,000 feet dancing under the Ethiopian sun. The wind howled across the Great Plains like the voices of forgotten ancestors, whipping the dust into spectral shapes as the Paiute prophet Wovoka stood before his people with a vision that would set the West ablaze. In 1889, after surviving a fever that brought him to the brink of death, he emerged with a revelation: the ghost dance, a sacred ceremony that would summon the spirits of the dead, sweep away the white settlers, and restore the land to its untamed glory. This wasn't just a dance, it was a revolution woven from footsteps and prayer, a final, desperate plea to forces older than borders or bullets. Participants described the ritual with trembling reverence. For 5 consecutive days, dancers formed vast circles, their bodies painted with sacred symbols, red for the dawn, black for the night, white for the spirit world. Moving counterclockwise to unwind time itself, they chanted Wovoka's hymns until their throats cracked, their feet blistering against the hard earth. Some collapsed into trances, their eyes rolling back as they glimpsed visions of the coming cataclysm. Earthquakes swallowing ranches, buffalo thundering back from extinction, the sky itself parting to reveal ancestors riding clouds of dust. The shirts they wore, adorned with celestial patterns and feathers, were believed to make them bulletproof, a conviction so powerful it drew thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho to the movement, stitching together tribes fractured by war and displacement. But the ghost dance was more than resistance, it was resurrection theology in motion. Wovoka preached nonviolence, urging followers to live upright lives until the prophecy fulfilled itself. His vision, borrowed from Christian millennialism, learned during his upbringing among white ranchers yet remained fiercely indigenous in its execution. The dance's circular motion mirrored the sacred hoop of life, while the timing coincided with the solar eclipse of January 1, 1890, an event many took as a celestial confirmation. Even the government's own ethnologists admitted the dance's hypnotic power. One agent described watching hundreds move in perfect synchrony, their voices rising, like the drone of a great hive shaking the ground beneath him. The backlash was swift and merciless. Alarmed by the movement's rapid spread, the U.S. government banned the ghost dance, branding it a prelude to uprising. Panic reached its peak at Wounded Knee, where 7th Cavalry troops opened fire on Lakota dancers wearing their sacred shirts, slaughtering nearly 300 men, women, and children. The massacre didn't just crush the movement, it weaponized its symbols. Soldiers stripped the dead of their ghost shirts as trophies, mocking the very faith that had promised protection. Yet in a cruel twist, those same shirts later found their way into museum collections, where modern-day Lakota activists still petition for their return, insisting the garments hold power even in silence. What lingers isn't just the tragedy, but the paradox. The ghost dance failed to bring the promised renewal, yet it succeeded in ways Wovoka never imagined. It became the first pan-indigenous spiritual movement, uniting tribes across language and geography. Its songs survived in secret, passed down through generations like embers waiting for the right wind. Today, some scholars argue the prophecy did come true not through supernatural cataclysm, but through the slow resurgence of native sovereignty, the return of buffalo to tribal lands, and the unbroken thread of ceremony that still ties the living to those who danced their hopes into the earth. The circle never truly broke, it just paused, gathering strength for the next turn. Under cover of darkness in the olive groves outside Rome, whispers spread of a new cult, one that promised liberation from the rigid chains of society, if only you dared to surrender to the night. This was the Bacchanalia, an orgiastic rite honoring Bacchus, the god of wine and ecstasy, where the lines between mortal and divine blurred in a haze of fermented grapes and flickering torchlight. What began as a women-only ceremony imported from Greece had mutated into something far more dangerous by the 2nd century BCE, secret gatherings where senators' sons rubbed shoulders with slaves, where wine flowed until inhibitions crumbled, and where, according to horrified Roman authorities, nothing was forbidden. The rituals followed the lunar cycle, always held under a new or crescent moon. Initiates, sworn to secrecy under penalty of death, would gather in secluded groves or wealthy patrons' villas. First came the Liberalia, a ceremonial drinking of undiluted wine mixed with honey, a potent brew meant to channel Bacchus' divine madness. Then the drums began, their frenzied rhythms syncing with participants' heartbeats as they spun in wild circles, their ivy-crowned hair whipping against sweat-slicked skin. Livy's accounts, though biased, paint a lurid picture. Shrieks mingled with debauchery, initiates claiming to hear the god's voice in the thunder, and rumors of ritualized poisonings and sexual violence against those who resisted the frenzy. But it wasn't just the hedonism that terrified Rome's elite, it was the subversion. In a society built on hierarchy, the Bacchanalia erased distinctions. Slaves drank alongside aristocrats, women wielded authority as priestesses, and whispered oaths bound members tighter than citizenship ever could. The Senate's own investigation alleged a shadowy network of over 7,000 initiates across Italy, with cells exchanging encrypted messages via wine-stained cloth. When a young nobleman, Ebutius, exposed the cult after his lover was coerced into joining, the state's response was swift and brutal. The Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus of 1860 BC survives on a bronze tablet, its words still chilling: "Let no man harbor a bacchanal shrine. If any persist, let them be sought as enemies of Rome." Thousands were arrested, with mass executions at the Tarpeian Rock. Those spared faced lifelong infamy, their properties confiscated, their right to testify in court revoked. Yet the crackdown revealed a telling anxiety. The Senate didn't just ban the rites. They outlawed gatherings of more than 3 people for religious purposes unless approved by the state. The message was clear: Rome would tolerate no power but its own. Beneath the moral panic lies a deeper irony. The same patricians who condemned the Bacchanalia hosted their own lavish symposia where wine-fueled excess was routine. The difference: control. Bacchus followers sought ecstatic union with the divine, bypassing priests and politicians. That was the true threat, not the debauchery, but the democracy of transcendence. Modern excavations near Rome have uncovered underground shrines with frescoes of Theseus wielding maenads, their faces frozen in rapture. The stones whisper what Livy's propaganda obscured. Sometimes the most dangerous rituals aren't those that break laws, but those that break chains. In the mist-cloaked highlands of South Sulawesi, where rice terraces carve emerald steps into the mountains, the Toraja people perform a ritual that would unsettle most cultures, yet for them, it's an act of profound love. Every few years, families gather at cliffside burial caves, their hands steady as they unwrap the cloth from ancestors who have been dead for decades. This is Manin, the ceremony of cleaning corpses, where death isn't an ending but a slow transformation. The mummies, preserved through a centuries-old embalming process using local herbs and tree sap, are gently lifted from their coffins. Rotting clothes are replaced with fresh fabrics, their leathery skin brushed free of dust, their hollow eye sockets fitted with new sunglasses to shield them from the sun they haven't felt in years. Then comes the moment that chills outsiders to the bone. The dead are carefully stood upright and guided through the village, their stiff limbs supported by living relatives as if they're merely elderly parents needing assistance. The ritual's origins trace back to the animistic beliefs that predate Christianity's arrival in Toraja. Ancestors or Temacula aren't gone. They exist in Puya, a parallel world where they still influence harvests, health, and family fortunes. By caring for their physical forms, the living maintain a bond that transcends time. Modern Torajans blend this with Catholic teachings, creating a syncretic tradition where funeral masses coexist with ancient mummification. The dead aren't mourned once and forgotten. Their household members, consulted in times of trouble, celebrated in annual feasts, and yes, even taken for strolls. Preparing for Manin is as meticulous as planning a wedding. Families save for years to afford new garments, often tailored to the deceased's favorite colors or styles. A grandmother might be dressed in her beloved floral sarong, a warrior uncle in a fresh military uniform. The most poignant touches are personal: eyeglasses for a scholar who treasured books, a favorite pipe tucked into a grandfather's jaw. Anthropologists note how these choices reflect Toraja's unique view of person. Hood identity isn't erased by death, but preserved, honored, and continually reintroduced to younger generations. But the ritual isn't without its controversies. Some mummies, especially those from wealthier families, are so well preserved they're displayed in glass cabinets inside family homes, their presence a constant in daily life. Western visitors often recoil, misinterpreting this as macabre, but for Torajans, it's no different than keeping a beloved grandparent's portrait on the wall. The true challenge comes with tourism. Once secret burial sites now draw curious outsiders wielding cameras, their flashes disrupting the solemnity of the rites. Some families have begun charging fees, leading to debates about commodification versus cultural preservation. The most striking aspect of Manin isn't the spectacle, it's the intimacy. Unlike distant ancestors revered in abstract, Torajan dead remain tactile. Children hold their great-grandparents' hands, wives adjust the headscarves of husbands lost decades prior, and entire families pose for photos with their mummified kin as casually as others might at a reunion. In a world that often hides death behind hospital curtains and hushed funeral parlors, the Toraja confront it with open eyes and steady hands. Their ritual whispers a radical truth, that love doesn't recognize the boundaries of breath, and memory is strongest when it isn't confined to stories, but lives in the careful act of dressing a parent one last time. Perched on barren hilltops outside Mumbai and Yazd, silent stone circles loom against the sky, ancient platforms where the dead don't decay into earth but vanish into thin air. These are the Dakma, or Towers of Silence, the heart of Zoroastrian death rituals for over 3,000 years. In a faith that venerates earth, fire, and water as sacred elements too pure to defile with corpses, the sky becomes the only fitting cemetery. The practice isn't just practical, it's a cosmological masterpiece balancing spiritual ecology with stark poetic finality. When a Zoroastrian dies, the rituals begin with meticulous precision. The body is washed in gom as unconsecrated bull's urine, a purifying agent believed to neutralize spiritual corruption. White-clad nasazalas, or corpse-bearers, then transport the deceased to the Dakma, chanting prayers to shield themselves from Nasu, the demonic force of decay. Iron gates swing open to reveal a concentric stone platform. Men laid in the outer ring, women in the middle, children at the center, a hierarchy reflecting ancient purity laws. Within hours, vultures descend, reducing flesh to bone with startling efficiency. Modern parsers describe the sound as a rustling tempest of wings, a natural alchemy turning mortality into flight. The science behind this tradition is as fascinating as its symbolism. Vultures possess stomach acid 10 times stronger than humans, capable of digesting anthrax and cholera. By consuming corpses, they prevent disease spread, a public health measure centuries ahead of its time. But the ritual's genius lies in its zero-waste philosophy. After the bird's feast, sun and wind bleach the bones, which are later collected and dissolved in lime pits. Nothing pollutes the earth. Even rainwater runoff is channeled through charcoal and sand filters before rejoining the ecosystem. Yet the tower's greatest test came in the 1990s, when India's vulture population collapsed by 99% due to diclofenac poisoning from cattle carcasses. Without nature's cleanup crew, bodies took weeks to decompose, sparking a theological crisis. Some parsers turned to solar concentrators, giant mirrors, to accelerate decomposition, while conservatives argued this violated tradition. The debate reveals the ritual's deeper tension: how to honor the sacred in a changing world. Zoroastrianism's view of death as a temporary victory for evil until the final resurrection makes these rites profoundly hopeful. The Dakma isn't a grave, it's a battleground where purity triumphs over corruption. As one priest explained, we return to the elements but never to the darkness. In an age of environmental crisis, this ancient practice whispers a radical truth, that how we treat our dead might just determine how we cherish the living. In the sweltering heat of late summer, when the air in China grows thick with the scent of incense and smoldering paper, something extraordinary stirs in the unseen world. The Hungry Ghost Festival marks the time when the gates of the underworld swing open, releasing restless spirits to wander among the living for an entire month. This isn't just superstition, it's a centuries-old negotiation between realms, where families race to appease the dead before misfortune strikes. Picture this: sidewalks transformed into makeshift altars, stacks of hell money bursting into golden flames, and banquet tables groaning under the weight of whole roasted pigs, steamed buns, and fruit arranged with meticulous care. Every dumpling, every flickering candle is a plea whispered into the darkness. Take this and leave us in peace. The rituals begin long before the festival's peak on the 15th lunar month. Paper effigies, everything from iPads to luxury cars, are crafted with startling detail, then burned to ensure ancestors stay modern in the afterlife. But the most haunting offerings are the cooling paper, sheets stamped with prayers and tossed into rivers to soothe spirits who died by drowning. In Hong Kong, opera stages face empty seats at midnight, their crimson curtains parting for an audience only the performers can see. These ghost operas aren't entertainment, they're sacred appeasement, believed to distract malevolent spirits from harassing the living. What makes this festival so gripping is its duality. On one hand, there's deep reverence for ancestors, with families placing photographs on home altars and offering their favorite meals. But lurking beneath is sheer terror of the hungry ghosts, spirits who died violently without descendants to honor them. These are the ones who might curse your business, sicken your children, or whisper nightmares into your sleep. To appease them, communities organize sprawling pudu feasts in temple courtyards, where monks chant over plates of food that will later be left to spoil, a banquet for the invisible and ravenous. The festival's climax is a spectacle of fire and flight. Paper lanterns shaped like lotus flowers drift skyward, their glow guiding lost souls home. In Taiwan, thousands gather to watch towering paper effigies of the King of Ghosts set ablaze, his towering frame collapsing into embers that believers say carry their prayers downward. Even skeptics report eerie phenomena during this time: unexplained chills, objects moving on their own, dreams of shadowy figures reaching for the offerings left on doorsteps. Modern adaptations reveal the festival's resilience. Eco-conscious versions replace hell money with QR codes for digital offerings, while urbanites substitute elaborate feasts with takeout containers. But the core remains unchanged, a visceral acknowledgement that the dead walk among us, and that survival, whether spiritual or psychological, depends on remembering what they crave. After all, a ghost ignored is far more dangerous than one who's been fed. When the summer solstice sun hangs heavy over the birch forests of Eastern Europe, an ancient magic stirs in the twilight, a night when water burns, flowers speak, and love spells woven into wreaths of wild blooms might just come true. This is Cupola Night, the Slavic celebration of midsummer where the boundaries between the human and spirit worlds grow thin as gossamer. Named after the sun god Cupolo, the rituals blend pagan fertility rites with later Christian overtones, creating a tapestry of fire, water, and prophecy that still sets villages alight with anticipation each June. The bonfires come first, towering pyres built in concentric circles, their crackling flames said to purify sins and ward off mischievous forest spirits. As darkness falls, young couples join hands and sprint toward the inferno, leaping high over the embers in a test of devotion. Clear the flames together and your love will last the year. Hesitate or stumble and whispers of doom follow. Elders watch from the shadows, nodding as sparks spiral upward, each ember representing a soul-granted protection from misfortune. But the fires serve more than symbolism. Herbs tossed into the blaze, thyme, mugwort, and the sacred fern release aromatic smoke believed to cure ailments and reveal hidden truths to those brave enough to inhale the intoxicating fumes. Nearby, rivers glimmer with constellations of candlelit flower wreaths, each one a young woman's silent prayer for love, crafted at dawn from 9 different blossoms plucked in utter silence. So as not to scare away the magic, these floating garlands carry more than beauty. A wreath that stays lit and afloat promises marriage within the year. One that sinks or drifts ashore spells spinsterhood. Boys wade into the currents, striving to capture wreaths as tokens of affection, while older women read the patterns of the drifting lights like fortune tellers scrying in water. The most coveted wreaths contain Ivan Domaria, a yellow and purple flower said to bond couples as strongly as its twin blossoms clinging to a single stem. Then comes the hunt for the fern flower, the legendary blossom that blooms only at midnight on Cupola, glowing like a fairy lantern amidst the deepest thickets. According to folktales, finding it grants the power to understand animal speech, uncover buried treasure, or become invisible. But the search is perilous. Forest spirits weave illusions to lead seekers astray, and those who stray too far might awaken days later with no memory of their ordeal. Modern botanists smile at the notion ferns reproduce via spores. After all, yet even today, villagers speak in hushed tones of strange lights flickering between the trees on this one enchanted night. What makes cupola endure isn't just its pageantry, but its profound connection to nature's rhythms. The rituals mirror the solstice's themes of fertility and abundance. Jumping fires echoes the sun's zenith, while water rituals honor the life-giving rains of summer. In Belarus, celebrants still roll burning wheels down hillsides, an homage to the sun's cyclical journey. Ukraine's Vidma dances, where women whirl in flower crowns, likely descend from priestess ceremonies invoking crop goddesses. Even the Soviet Union's attempts to rebrand the holiday as Ivan Cupola Day couldn't sever its pagan roots. Families simply whispered the old incantations behind closed doors. The magic lingers in unexpected ways. Scientists note that the timing of cupola around June 21st aligns with peak concentrations of medicinal compounds in regional herbs, lending credibility to traditions of gathering scent. John's wort or chamomile at midnight, the floating wreaths, hydrodynamic experiments show that symmetrical designs with certain flowers do indeed float longer, suggesting generations of empirical refinement. As for the fern flower, well, some swear that fireflies clustering in damp glades could explain those elusive golden glimmers. To witness cupola today is to step into a living paradox. Teenage girls in jeans and smartphones crafting wreaths just as their ancestors did. TikTok influencers filming fire jumps alongside village grandmothers who remember when the rituals were banned. The bonfires still burn, not because anyone truly believes in water nymphs or fern magic anymore, but because some truths don't need justifying. That longing to touch the mysterious, to feel the universe wink back at you for one fleeting night, that's the real flower that never fades. The drums begin before dawn, a deep, thunderous rhythm that shakes the red earth of southwestern Nigeria, calling forth something far older than memory. When the egungun appears, it's not just a man in cloth, it's a storm of color and motion, a swirling avalanche of layered textiles in indigo, saffron, and gold, each strip handwoven and imbued with the names of ancestors. This is no performance. The Yoruba believe the dancer beneath the costume vanishes the moment the mask descends, his body seized by the collective spirit of the dead. To witness an egungun masquerade is to stand in the presence of those who have crossed over, their voices hissing through the seams of the costume, their wisdom, and warnings delivered in guttural tones that chill the blood. The rituals begin in secrecy. Weeks before a festival, initiates sequester the chosen dancer, bathing him in herbs that reek of iron and burnt honey. He learns to move not as a living man, but as the dead, jerky, unpredictable motions that mimic the dislocation of the spirit world. The costume itself is sacred architecture, up to 50 pounds of fabric strips, each representing a lineage, layered to conceal every inch of skin. Brass amulets sewn into the hem rattle like snakes, a sound believed to repel evil forces. But the true power lies in the mask, often carved from Iroko wood so dense it's said to contain the tree's own stubborn soul. When the egungun emerges, the rules are absolute. No one may touch it, not even to steady a stumble. Contact with the living risks severing the delicate bridge between worlds, potentially trapping the ancestor's spirit in our realm. Children are whisked indoors if the masquerade grows agitated. Elders prostrate themselves, whispering petitions. The dead don't come to comfort, they come to correct. An egungun might single out a corrupt chief, its distorted voice detailing hidden crimes, or whirl violently before a home where discord simmers, its flailing sleeves scattering blessings like invisible seeds. Modern scholars have recorded startling phenomena around these rituals. The dancer's voice often drops several octaves, a physiological improbability without vocal modifiers. More eerie are the cold spots. Witnesses describe pockets of sudden chill in the sweltering heat, as if the air itself resists the ancestors' presence. But the most compelling evidence lies in the messages themselves. Time and again, Egunguns have revealed family secrets known only to the deceased, or delivered prophecies that unfold with uncanny accuracy. What outsiders often miss is the Egungun's role as social justice. In pre-colonial Yorubaland, these masquerades functioned as a shadow legal system. A merchant caught cheating might find an Egungun blocking his stall for days, its silent presence a boycott enforced by the ancestors. Land disputes were settled when a masquerade pointed to buried boundary stones no living elder remembered. The costumes' layered fabrics aren't just decoration, they're a physical metaphor for the way the past wraps around the present, constricting or comforting as needed. Today, the tradition thrives in diaspora, from Brazilian candomblé to Cuban santeria. Though the costumes grow lighter, the rituals abbreviated. Yet in Oyotunji Village, South Carolina, a Yoruba revivalist community, the old ways persist. Here, Egunguns still emerge during the Feast of the Return, their costumes stitched with the names of African Americans whose ancestral ties were severed by slavery. The message is the same as in Nigeria: the dead aren't gone. They're waiting, watching, and when the drums call, they come dancing, not as ghosts but as judges, healers, and the living memory of a people who refuse to be forgotten. On the windswept plateaus of the Himalayas, where the air is so thin it scrapes the lungs, a lone figure stands at the edge of a charnel ground, a place where corpses are left for sky burial. Clad in robes stitched from bone ornaments, the Tibetan Buddhist practitioner raises a damaru drum in one hand, a thigh-bone trumpet in the other, and begins the churd ritual, a practice so radical it turns the very concept of fear inside out. This isn't mere meditation, it's a visceral confrontation with the deepest terrors of the human psyche, where the path to enlightenment runs straight through the marrow of one's own imagined corpse. The ritual unfolds like a macabre ballet. First comes the invocation, chanted in a voice that oscillates between song and scream, calling forth every demon, ghost, and malevolent spirit within earshot. Then the practitioner visualizes their own body transforming into a mountain of flesh and bone, a grotesque feast offered freely to the assembled spirits. With a ritual flaying knife, they slice open their skull, their limbs, their organs, their very sense of self, until nothing remains but a hollow vessel of light. The demons aren't enemies here, they're guests at a sacred banquet, their hunger mirroring the practitioner's own attachments to ego and desire. What makes churd so startling isn't just the graphic imagery, but its psychological precision. Developed in the 11th century by the Yogini Machig Labdrön, the practice weaponizes the mind's instinctive revulsion to death. By willingly dismembering their own imagined form, often while sitting in actual graveyards or places of extreme danger, practitioners expose the illusion of a fixed, independent self. Modern neuroscientists note parallels with exposure therapy, where confronting fears in a controlled environment can rewire deep-seated trauma. But churd goes further. It doesn't just neutralize fear, it alchemizes it into compassion, teaching that even the darkest forces can become allies on the path to awakening. The tools of the ritual are charged with symbolic weight. The kangeling, or thigh-bone trumpet, isn't just an instrument, it's a reminder of impermanence, often crafted from human bone, traditionally donated by practitioners post-mortem. The drum's rhythmic pulse mimics the heartbeat, grounding the visualization in the body's own cadence. Even the choice of location matters. Churd is rarely performed in temples. It belongs to the wild edges, clifftops, crossroads, places where the veil between worlds feels thin. Western observers often misinterpret the practice as self-violence, but seasoned practitioners describe something closer to ecstatic surrender. "You don't offer your body because it's worthless," explains one lama. You offer it because it's the most precious thing you have, and only by giving it away can you understand its true nature. Accounts from retreats describe practitioners laughing mid-ritual, their terror transmuted into a dizzying freedom. Some report visions of demons transforming into deities mid-feast, their fanged maws softening into smiles as the gift is accepted. The ritual's legacy persists in unexpected ways. Modern psychologists have adapted churd-inspired visualizations for treating PTSD, guiding patients to befriend traumatic memories rather than flee them. Adventure athletes speak of similar mindset shifts when facing mortal danger. A climber on Everest described a churd-like clarity when visualizing death as a dance partner during a storm. Even the practice's core paradox resonates beyond Buddhism. How can we hold space for darkness without being consumed by it? Perhaps the most haunting testimony comes from those who have sat with dying churd masters. As their breath grows shallow, their whispers often return to the same refrain, that the greatest demons aren't out there in the charnel grounds. They're the ones we've carried all along, gnawing at the edges of our awareness, until the moment we finally turn, not with a weapon, but an open hand, and say, "Here. Take what you need, there's enough for us all." The outback sun beats down like a hammer on stone as a young Aboriginal Australian stands at the edge of their known world, bare feet pressing into red earth older than time. This is the beginning of Walkabout, not just a journey, but a sacred unraveling and reweaving of the self, where the desert becomes both womb and proving ground. For 6 weeks to several months, adolescents venture alone into the wilderness armed with nothing but generations of ancestral wisdom encoded in songlines, living maps sung into existence during the dream time, where every rock, waterhole, and twisted gum tree holds a verse in an epic ballad of creation. These songlines are more than navigation tools, they're sonic constellations. By chanting the traditional melodies passed down through uncounted generations, initiates align themselves with the footsteps of ancestral beings who shaped the land. A particular sequence of notes might correspond to a cluster of desert oaks guiding the traveler to water. A change in rhythm signals a sacred site where spirits whisper lessons on survival and ethics. Anthropologists have documented cases where individuals walking unfamiliar terrain reached safety by precisely following songs learned hundreds of miles away, a testament to the staggering accuracy of these oral cartographies. But Walkabout isn't just about physical endurance, it's a ritual death and rebirth. The initiate symbolically sheds their childhood identity through ceremonies before departure, often involving smoke cleansing and the imprinting of ritual scars. In the solitude of the desert, they encounter Tjukapa, the dreaming through visions induced by thirst, exhaustion, and the relentless pulse of the land. Some return with stories of meeting their totem animals, kangaroo men or emu women who impart secret knowledge. Others speak of ancestral spirits appearing in whirlwinds or the shapes of distant mountains at dawn. The trials are meticulously calibrated. Elders observe from a distance, intervening only in mortal danger. A youth might be directed to track a honey ant nest using only the songline's clues, or spend 3 nights alone at a lightning-struck boulder where legend says the rainbow serpent once rested. Failure isn't punished but integrated. A broken spear tip becomes a lesson in humility. A missed water source a reminder to listen more deeply. Modern researchers have identified physiological changes in initiates post-walkabout. Heightened visual memory for tracking, increased pain tolerance, and cortisol levels suggesting profound neural rewiring from sustained ritual focus. What happens when Western notions collide with this ancient rite? In the 1950s, authorities often mistook walkabout youths as runaways, forcibly returning them to missions. Today, some communities blend tradition with necessity. Initiates might carry satellite phones for emergencies while still honoring the spirit of solitude. The Pitjantjatjara people have even established walkabout scholarships, funding urban indigenous youth to reconnect with country through modified journeys. The walkabout's power lies in its paradox. By becoming utterly lost in the wilderness, these young people find themselves woven into something infinite. When they finally return, a thinner, fiercer-eyed, the community doesn't celebrate with fanfare. They listen. The initiate's first words upon re-entry are considered oracular, a distillation of ancestral wisdom earned through sun-scorched lips. In a world where coming of age often means scrolling and shopping, the walkabout stands as a defiant reminder that some truths can only be earned by walking barefoot through the fire of your own becoming, following songs older than borders until the desert sings you home. The firelight flickered low in the longhouse as the vulva settled onto the high seat, her carved staff clutched in hands knotted with age and wisdom. Around her, the air thickened with the scent of burning henbane, a herb so potent its fumes could drag even the sturdiest warrior into visions. This was Seidr, the Norse practice of shamanic magic, where the boundaries between male and female, living and dead, crumbled like ash in the wind. To the Vikings, these rituals weren't superstition. They were a perilous negotiation with forces that could make kings or break them, wielded by women who walked with one foot in Midgard and the other in the shadowed realms beyond. What set Seidr apart from other Norse magic was its intimacy with the taboo. Practitioners, mostly women called vulvas, though some accounts speak of male Seidr, men entered trances so deep they seemed to die and resurrect. Cloaked in feathered mantles that whispered of the spirit world, they perched on wooden platforms or animal skins, chanting in tongues that slithered between human speech and the growls of beasts. The staff they carried wasn't just a tool, it was a axis mundi, a bridge to Yggdrasil's roots, carved with runes that throbbed under their fingertips like living things. Some sagas describe vulvas devouring hallucinogenic stews of hemlock and fly agaric, their pupils swelling into black pools as they summoned the dead for counsel. Others rode invisible steeds through the night, their souls galloping across the sky while their bodies lay stiff as corpses. The rituals defied Viking norms in startling ways. Seidr was considered unmanly for male practitioners, a stain on their honor in a culture that prized martial prowess. Yet Odin himself, the All-Father, was its most infamous devotee, having learned the art from the goddess Freyja. His pursuit of knowledge trumped societal scorn, a paradox that underscores Seidr's power. It demanded surrender, a softening of the rigid self, to harness forces that could unravel fate. When a vulva prophesied, entire war bands would halt their raids, hanging on every slurred word. In one chilling account from the saga of Eric the Red, a vulva named Thorbjörg warned of a coming famine unless the women sang forbidden charms, a demand that would have been blasphemy from anyone else. They sang and the crops survived. The tools of Seidr reveal its eerie duality. Excavations at Danish bog sites have turned up witch staffs tipped with brass cages holding human hair likely from the dead, meant to amplify their voices. The staffs, typically used for spinning wool, doubled as divination rods, their walls etched with faces screaming in ecstasy or agony. Even the vulva's seat held meaning, often covered with hen feathers, symbols of Freyja's cloak, which could transform her into a falcon. Modern chemists analyzing residue from suspected ritual cauldrons found traces of tropane alkaloids, compounds that induce visions of flight or monstrous transformations. But Seidr's darkest facet was its malleability. The same rites that healed could curse. A vulva might bless a child's birth one night, then carve a knitting pole, a curse stick smeared with horse blood, to doom an enemy the next. The infamous death of the Norwegian king Vanlandi was blamed on a Sami Seidr worker who rode him like a nightmare until he perished in his sleep. Fear of this power lingered long after Christianity's arrival. Medieval laws forbade sitting out to summon spirits, and vulvas were recast as witches in new religious scripts. Yet traces endure. In Iceland, folk magicians still practice Utæsta, the act of sitting atop graves to commune with the dead. Faroe Islanders tell of women who steal the wind by loosening knots in ropes, a distilled echo of Seidr's weather magic. And in Oslo museums, those iron staffs rest behind glass, their runes whispering of a time when the veil between worlds wasn't just thin, it was something you could grasp, twist, and pull apart with your bare hands. The Volvers understood what we've forgotten. That prophecy isn't about seeing the future. It's about unraveling the present until every thread, no matter how hidden, lies exposed. The streets of Bali erupt in a riot of color and motion as the funeral tower sways above the crowd, its tiered bamboo frames towering 3 stories high, each level carved with Garuda wings and lotus blossoms. This is Ungaben, the Balinese fire ceremony where death isn't mourned, it's celebrated as the soul's final liberation. Unlike the summer funerals of the West, Ungaben is a jubilant send-off, a cosmic graduation party where families pour their savings into gold-leafed coffins, elaborate offerings, and feasts that stretch for blocks. The body, wrapped in white and bathed in turmeric, isn't a corpse to these islanders. It's merely a vessel, a borrowed shell now ready to return to the elements. At the heart of the ritual lies the Bade, the towering funeral tower carried on the shoulders of dozens of men, their muscles straining as they deliberately shake and spin the structure to confuse malevolent spirits lurking along the procession route. The higher the tower, the smoother the soul's ascent to Svarga, the heavenly realm. But it's the bull-shaped sarcophagus, carved from sandalwood and draped in crimson cloth, that steals the spectacle. This isn't just a coffin, it's a sacred vehicle, its horns symbolizing strength to break through earthly attachments. Families compete to create the most exquisite designs, some inlaid with mirrors to repel evil, others adorned with cascades of frangipani and kanang sari offerings. When the procession reaches the cremation ground, the mood shifts from carnival to reverence. A high priest chants ancient Sanskrit mantras as the body is transferred to the sarcophagus, then lights the pyre with a flame taken from Mount Agung, Balinese Hinduism's holiest volcano. As smoke curls skyward, the crowd doesn't weep. They toss rice and coins into the flames, cheering as the heat grows intense enough to crack bone. There's a reason for this joy. Balinese believe that without Ungaben, the soul remains trapped in a liminal space, haunting descendants as a restless predator or hungry ghost. The flames act as a purifying bridge, burning away not just flesh but karma. 12 days later, families gather again for the moko ceremony, where ashes are collected and cast into the sea. But here's the twist, they're not scattered randomly. Priests invoke mantras to guide the particles toward holy sites like Tanah Lot or Uluwatu, where ocean currents are said to carry them directly to the afterlife. Modern Balinese sometimes mix ashes with flower petals or rice flour, creating biodegradable balls that dissolve like celestial messages in the tide. What outsiders often miss is Ungaben's economic and ecological ingenuity. The bamboo towers are dismantled post-ceremony and repurposed as building materials. Offerings left at temples are swiftly reclaimed by monkeys and birds, leaving no waste. Even the timing is precise. Mass Ungabens are held every 5 years in some villages, allowing poorer families to pool resources. The ritual isn't frozen in tradition, it evolves. Urban Balinese now opt for electric crematoriums during pandemics, while diaspora communities in Sydney or Amsterdam ship ashes home for symbolic sea ceremonies. The deeper magic of Ungaben lies in its paradox, a ritual that costs millions of rupiah yet is considered essential even for the poorest families. To skip it would be unthinkable, like denying a child education. When the flames finally die down and the last gamelan notes fade, what lingers isn't grief but a quiet certainty. That death isn't an end, just a doorway painted gold by fire, music, and the unshakable belief that love doesn't burn, it ascends. The knife wasn't made for flesh. This blade of black obsidian, honed to a molecular edge, existed solely to carve the unseen. In the hushed sanctity of the embalmer's workshop, where the scent of natron and myrrh clung to the walls like a second skin, the priest raised the pesesh kef over the mummy's rigid lips. This was no ordinary surgery. With each precise incision, first the mouth, then the eyes, the ears, the nostrils, he wasn't just opening a corpse. He was performing cosmic acupuncture, unblocking the channels through which the soul would taste, see, hear, and breathe in the Juat, the perilous realm of the dead. The opening of the mouth ceremony wasn't the finale of mummification, it was the crescendo. After 70 days of dehydration, organ removal, and resin-soaked winding, the body lay perfected but spiritually inert. Ancient Egyptians believed the Ba soul and Ka life force couldn't recognize their own shell without this ritual. The tools themselves were divine replicas. The Pesesh Kef mirrored the flint knife used by Isis to resurrect Osiris, while the adze, shaped like the Big Dipper, connected the mummy to the eternal circumpolar stars. Every stroke was choreographed, recited from the Book of the Dead. I open your mouth for you with the weapon of Anubis, with the iron blade that split the mouths of the gods. But the true genius lay in the sensory reactivation. Priests anointed the mummy's lips with honey, the sweetest substance known, to restore speech. A feather brushed across the eyes symbolized the return of sight, specifically the ability to behold the sun god Ra during his nightly journey through the underworld. Frankincense smoke wafted into carved nostrils not just for scent, but to mimic the breath of life itself. Even touch was accounted for. The mummy's hands were positioned to clutch amulets or Heka spells, ensuring they could grasp the tools needed to navigate the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered startling proof of the ritual's visceral reality. CT scans of mummies like Rames's Roman III revealed deliberate postmortem fractures around the jawline, evidence of the Pesesh Kef's physical manipulation. Some mummies wear golden mouth plates not just as aristocratic finery, but as metaphysical prosthetics, literal voice boxes for the deceased. The most haunting finds are the so-called screaming mummies, their jaws wrenched open in eternal silent wails, likely botched ceremonies where the priest's hand slipped during the sacred cuts. Yet the ritual transcended mere mechanics. During the culminating feast, the mummy was propped upright, strapped to a wall if necessary to partake in a meal of roast oxen, figs, and beer. Family members pressed bread to its lips while priests chanted, "You shall not hunger, you shall not thirst." This symbolic nourishment wasn't for the body, but the Ka, which Egyptian texts describe as a ravenous shadow self needing constant sustenance. The finale, a priest pressed a ceremonial finger to the mummy's mouth, whispering the deceased's secret name, the one known only to the gods, to fully awaken its divine memory. What modern observers often miss is the ceremony's psychological depth. The weighing of the heart, where Anubis measured the heart against Maat's feather, wasn't just a test, it was an interrogation. Without a functioning mouth, the soul couldn't recite the 42 negative confessions. I have not stolen, I have not lied, nor plead its case before Osiris. The opening of the mouth wasn't about cheating death. It was about giving the dead a fighting chance in a courtroom where the jury included gods of unimaginable power. Today, echoes of the ritual persist in unexpected ways. Forensic embalmers note how modern viewings often involve subtly parting the deceased's lips, as if whispering one last secret. The Hindu Mukhagni cremation, where a priest cracks open the skull to release the soul, mirrors the same primal logic, and in the quiet of museum galleries, visitors still lean close to mummy cases, half expecting those gold-leafed mouths to part and speak across 40 centuries. They never do, but then again, maybe we're just not listening with the right ears. From the whirl of dervishes reaching for the divine to the solemn unfurling of mummy linens in preparation for eternity, these 30 rituals reveal something startling, not just about our ancestors, but about ourselves. Every culture, every epoch has carved its own doorway into the numinous, whether through ecstatic dance, blood-soaked altars, or whispered words over drifting flower wreaths. What unites them isn't the method, but the longing beneath, that relentless human itch to peel back the veil, to trade whispers with whatever lies beyond the thin wall of the visible world. Think of the Yoruba egungun, its fabric strips swirling with ancestral voices, and then pivot to the Tibetan churd practitioner offering their own flesh to hungry spirits, two continents, one truth. Both rituals acknowledge that the sacred isn't always gentle. Sometimes it demands surrender, even terror, before it grants understanding. Or consider the Aztec New Fire ceremony, where a king's chest became the spark for the sun's rebirth, and contrast it with Bali's joyous Ungaban pyres, where laughter mingles with smoke as souls slip their earthly tethers. One ritual trembles with apocalyptic stakes, the other sings of liberation. Yet both speak to the same primal deal, that life clings to death as tightly as flame clings to kindling. Modern minds might dismiss these practices as superstition, but look closer. The neurochemistry of the Oracle at Delphi's ethylene trance mirrors the dopamine surges of today's marathon runners chasing flow state. The communal catharsis of Cupola Night's bonfire leaps resurfaces in music festivals where strangers dance themselves into transcendent unity. Even our obsessions, cleansing routines, manifestation journals, silent retreats are diluted echoes of these ancient ceremonies. The tools change, the hunger doesn't. So tell us which of these rituals coiled around your imagination. Was it the Viking blot where blood became ink for contracts with gods? Or the ghost dance where 1,000 moccasins stamped hope into the dust of conquest? Maybe the quiet horror of the Haitian zombie, a reminder that the greatest monsters are often human hands wearing divine masks. Whatever lingers in your thoughts, let it linger. Share it, debate it, let it unsettle you, because these aren't just relics, they're mirrors. And here's the final twist: every era believes its rituals will last forever. The Egyptians never imagined a day when no one would remember the names to awaken the dead. The Celts couldn't fathom their sacred bonfires dwindling into tourist attractions. So look around. What are we doing now? Our wellness cults, our digital pilgrimages, our frantic scrolling for some shard of meaning that will one day seem just as strange, just as sacred. The rituals of the future are already being born in the unlikeliest places. The only question is, will they heal or will they harm?